What's up, guys? Nick Ehrlich here at Sweat Performance, and today in our seminar series we're going to be talking about the low carb life and how to make low carb diets low stress. So too commonly low carb diets are used as a short-term dieting method or kind of a crash diet, and today we're going to talk about what low carb dieting is, what it means, and how to make it a little more of a lifestyle for you. So today with our objectives, first and foremost, we're going to understand where low carb dieting came from and what low carb diets do to the body and inside the body and what makes them effective. We're also going to talk about why it is that low carb diets are effective, not just inside of our body, but as a lifestyle. And then we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls and shortcomings of low carb dieting, or maybe why your low carb diet has been unsuccessful in the past. And then again, we're really going to hammer in today how we make low carb living more of a lifestyle and less of a crash diet. So we're going to look to accomplish those 5 things today inside of this seminar. So first things first, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are one of the most misunderstood key nutrients when we're talking about protein, fat, carbohydrates, and water. Right now, they're one of the most taboo. You'll remember in the 80s, it was fats. The 70s and 80s were the first times we saw low-fat diets. But then we got less afraid of fat, and all of a sudden we started getting afraid of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates inherently are not a negative thing. There's nothing bad about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a large group of organic compounds occurring in foods and living tissues, and they include sugar, starch, and cellulose. So that's all carbohydrates are. And again, they're one of the 4 essential nutrients: protein, fat, carbohydrates, and water. All right. Now, they're broken down into glucose and used as the primary energy source inside of my body. So that glucose gets broken down, it gets stored in my muscles as glycogen, which is the fuel for all of my movements, and it is the best source of fuel for my body. Okay. So when we're talking about optimal fuel sources for the human body, glycogen is that. So again, carbohydrates are found in fruits, vegetables, some dairy products, wheat and grain-based foods, and then sugar, of course, is the most refined carbohydrate. So that's carbohydrates in a nutshell. So when we look at this as is presented, there's nothing really that's that dangerous or negative about carbohydrates. They occur naturally in nature, they're all around us, they're in fruits, vegetables, dairy products, they're all over the place. So there's really nothing to be inherently afraid of. It's just the consumption of them, when we eat them, how we eat them, foods we eat them with, and that's what makes low carbohydrate dieting kind of ideal as opposed to a high carbohydrate diet. So first of all, the high carb diet, right here we have the old FDA food pyramid where you see the bottom level of it is all carbohydrates. And then as we move up, we have fruits and vegetables where we've just found that that is a big source of carbohydrates. So the first thing is that the high carb diet, or the food pyramid as is presented right here, is actually encouraged by the FDA. This is what I remember in my classroom. You probably remember it in yours growing up. This was the food pyramid. They promoted that 50 to 60% of your diet was carbohydrate. But why did they do that? The first thing is that carbohydrates are very readily accessible for us kind of in public. They're all around us. We can get them in bread form, we can drink them, we can eat them, we can do all that stuff. They're very inexpensive too. Rice, oats, all that stuff, flour, it's super cheap, it's super easy to buy, and it's a really cheap way to fill up your plate when you're trying to think about putting meals together. They're also transportable. When you think about most quick, easy, on-the-go foods, we're talking about snack bars, granola bars, cereal, sandwiches, things like that. And so carbohydrates provide us a really easily accessible food option when we are eating on the go. A lot of our meals, a lot of our snacks at this point in our culture are eaten on the go or in some type of transit. So carbohydrates give us a great option to have foods that we keep in our bag or in our purse or in our desk or in our gym bag or wherever, so they're all around us. And then finally, carbohydrates taste good. Remember, sugar is the most refined carbohydrate of all, and sugar tastes awesome. That's why we eat it so much. That's why they pump it into so many foods. You'll remember in the movie Super Size Me, the Morgan Spurlock documentary, he said that there were only, I think, 3 options on the McDonald's menu that didn't contain any sugar. We pump sugar into everything. We pump carbs in everything because it makes it more palatable. All right, so that's the high carbohydrate diet, and that's really one of the things that makes it ideal, I should say. And then in my body level, on a chemical level, carbohydrate consumption is impossible to regulate. So I want you to visualize this for me. I want you to think about sitting down on the couch with a bag of baby carrots, or maybe a bag of raw almonds, or maybe some cut up chicken breast, I don't know. I want you to think about if it would be possible for you to consume those foods to have as much of them and to eat them for as long as you would eat a bag of chips or a bag of pretzels or a box of crackers? And the answer is probably no, that you couldn't do that. And that's because with my body's digestive process and chemicals, I have certain systems that regulate my consumption of proteins, fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, but I don't have that system for sugars. In fact, one of the things is that when you ingest, especially the simple carbohydrates, your body just wants to keep getting them, and it's really hard for it to regulate when you're full with those kind of foods. So when you're snacking on pretzels, chips, whatever, you tend to have this thing where you just eat them and eat them and eat them in kind of a robotic, kind of a hand-to-mouth setting, and that's what makes it so dangerous. So that's the high-carb diet in a nutshell. And remember, that until very recently is the way that the FDA actually encouraged that we eat, with 50 to 60 or 65% of my daily calories coming by way of carbohydrate. Now, thank God, we're starting to move towards modifying that pyramid a little bit, but for a long time, they still really encourage that. So the issues with the high-carb diet, all right, first and foremost, it increases your overall caloric intake, all right? If you were to fill your plate at dinner time with a third of your plate as proteins, a third of your plate as vegetables, a third of your plate as carbohydrates, it'd be one thing. But typically, our protein and our vegetable portion gets smaller and our carbohydrate intake gets really bigger. So when you're eating carbohydrates with your meal, you tend to eat a lot more of them and therefore greatly increase just your baseline caloric intake for that meal. Again, I want you to think about a time when you had a salad with chicken on it versus a time where you had spaghetti. You know, odds are you ate a lot more spaghetti than you ate salad because we don't have that regulatory mechanism that limits how we eat it. So a high-carb diet is going to increase my caloric intake overall. Next, it's going to give me wild blood sugar swings. And we have a slide later on in this presentation that's going to show you how that actually happens over time with a high carbohydrate meal. But with those blood sugar swings comes a lot of adverse side effects, okay? It's also going to lead to GI issues. People with gluten allergies or people with sugar sensitivities in their stomach, it's going to lead to bloating, diarrhea, gas, all that kind of bad stuff. And we're going to get into that again later on. And then again, high carbohydrate diets, because of what it's doing to your blood sugar levels, at a point can actually decrease cognitive function, all right? So it can impede your cognitive function, your ability to think and reason, okay? So this is, you know, you always call this like getting sugar cranky, you know what I mean? People who eat a lot of carbs and they crash, they're irritable, they're sad, they're low energy, they're not thinking as clearly, and it typically leads to another high carbohydrate meal. So with these last two slides, we can see that there's a lot of really negative stuff that comes along with a high carbohydrate diet when I'm getting 50 to 65% of my daily calories from carbohydrate sources. So clearly with that, it's time to make a switch from a high carbohydrate diet to a lower carbohydrate diet. Now, you'll notice I'm very sensitive to not say a no carbohydrate diet. I want to talk about a low carbohydrate diet. And we're going to talk about what that means in the next little bit. So the first is just the benefits from a low carb system. So we talked about the downfalls of a high carb system. Now the benefits of a low carb system are going to be as follows. So first of all, people looking to decrease body fat, a low carb system is one of the best ways to do that. When you talk about bodybuilders, models, figure athletes, even athletes that have to do things with their weight, boxers, wrestlers, people who have a weight-dependent sport, those people are all going to move towards a low carbohydrate diet in the latter phases of their training, because while their protein intake is supporting their muscle tissue, lowering those carbohydrates is going to lead to decreasing overall body fat better than just a reduced calorie diet. People looking to control their blood sugar levels. So these are going to be people like diabetics, people who are obese, people who need to really put a premium on lowering their overall blood sugar levels are going to really benefit from this low carb diet system. Now, there are a number of kind of health conditions or diseases that people have that a low carb diet can actually increase not just the efficacy of their medication or medical treatment, but can decrease overall symptoms. And that's going to be your diabetics, your epileptics, your high blood sugar patients, and even your high cholesterol patients. All those people are going to benefit from a low carb system, again, because of the fact that it controls blood sugar levels and decreases overall body fat levels. And then finally, people looking to eliminate processed foods from their diet. So when foods undergo processing, when an ear of corn or wheat or rice, when any of that stuff gets processed before it gets to you, odds are it's being made in to the simplest form of carbohydrate possible, and it's probably also having sugar added to it, okay? So if you're looking to eliminate processed foods and move closer to a from the farm, from the animal, from the ground kind of eating model, which I think we can all agree sounds really advantageous, getting rid of a lot of my carbohydrate intake is gonna easily allow me to move to eliminating processed foods from my diet. So the history of low carb diets is actually really, really interesting. A lot of times we think about low carb diets being really in the last couple years, but that's not necessarily true. And the first thing is 1863's Letter of Corpulence by Dr. William Harvey, okay? So this guy actually was working with a tailor in his town and gave him like the first low carbohydrate diet. And I've actually read this. I would say it's less of a book, probably more of a pamphlet, and it's really, really entertaining. Because it manages to be both incredibly eloquent and really scientific for a book written about low carb dieting in 1863, where they didn't have close to the medical technology that we had to look into low carb dieting. And this was actually a really successful kind of model for a little while, and then we went back to high carb eating. So next, in 1951, the DuPont diet by Dr. Alfred Pennington, the DuPont company hired this guy, Alfred Pennington, to walk around and figure out why their workers were gaining so much weight. So we noticed these people were sedentary, they weren't getting a lot of activity, so we installed this low carb eating system. And then in DuPont diet, he describes really a pretty modern low carb diet model. So in 1951, this becomes a great thing and people are losing weight with it. And then again, in 1992, enter the new diet revolution by Dr. Robert Atkins, or what became known as the Atkins diet. So here we have every 50 to 100 years us coming back to this low carb model. You know what I mean? You can see we're starting to move away from it in some circles, but there's something to this low carb model. Now, you'll notice I have a picture of an Inuit family on this slide. The Inuit population is one of the populations that we examine with low carb dieting, because here are people that don't have the ability to grow fruits or vegetables due to the climate that they live in. So a lot of their diet is based on fish, whale, hunting. It's a very high protein, very low carbohydrate diet, and a lot of that's due to necessity. But again, these were one of the groups of people that were shown to have tremendous health benefits because they lived this low carb diet. So not only has low carb dieting been something that we've done really for over 100 years, but we find tribes and cultures of people that have stuck to this due to necessity for a long time that don't have the same problems that we have in kind of mainland culture, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, things like that. These people were a lot more successful, and actually the introduction of carbohydrates into their diets and into their cultures ended up creating a lot of adverse health effects that they didn't have previously. So low carb dieting is not something we've just seen in the past 100 years. It's something that we've been seeing for a long, long time, I should say. So we're gonna move on and we're gonna talk about what does low carb really mean. And obviously we have a picture of Ryan Gosling here. So these are defined as diets that limit carbs to 20 to 60 grams of carbohydrates a day. So anything under 60 grams of carbohydrate a day is going to be considered a low carbohydrate diet. Now, we can also define that as producing less of 20% of my daily calories from carbohydrate sources, which means under 20% is going to be carbohydrates. The other 80% is going to be made up of proteins and fats, which is what, again, when you think of a lot of low carb diets, you think about animal proteins, you think about nuts, you think about seeds, you think about vegetables, but you don't think about carbohydrate-based foods. Now, a low-carb diet is going to limit starchy carbohydrates, sugar-based carbohydrates, alcohol-based carbohydrates a lot of time, and even some fruit-based carbohydrates. Now, I'm not going to pick on fruit that much today because I think fruit's a great thing, but a lot of low-carb diets, Atkins was one of them, South Beach did a little bit, started to limit your fruit intake and made people a little bit afraid of fruit, which I think might be a touch unfair. So again, these diets are going to rely on proteins, fats, and vegetables. And so one thing I've always talked about with weight loss eating are that proteins, fats, and fiber are the three most important things when I'm eating to lose body fat. So when we see vegetables up there, we're going to be talking about really good foods like broccoli and cauliflower and things like that. So let's start using vegetables interchangeably with fiber. Right? So we're getting protein, fat, and fiber in this low carb diet. Then those are things that are going to be really, really, really good for me losing body fat. So why do low carb diets actually work? What makes them successful? Well, first of all, low carb diets stabilize blood sugar levels and they prevent the highs and lows of blood sugar. Now, when you have a really high blood sugar level, you're gonna have a really manic level of energy. You're gonna be all over the place. You'll feel really energized, really dialed in. But once that blood sugar curve starts to crash, that's when we're gonna start feeling really lethargic, really tired, really groggy, really irritable. And that's gonna lead us to another big carbohydrate intake, which is gonna spike my blood sugars up once again. And that's where binging comes from. That's one of those triggers that makes me binge, all right? Now, a low carb diet is also going to promote and encourage ketosis, okay? So ketosis is a really optimal state for your body to burn body fat for fuel, and we're actually going to get into that in the next slide, so I'm not going to get too deep into ketosis, but ketosis is a state where my body is hyper-utilizing body fat for fuel. Now again, we talked about it before, a low carb diet is also going to help to eliminate a lot of processed foods, gluten, sugar from my intake, so it's really going to clean up my food in terms of just by proxy of eating low carb, going to get rid of a lot of those processed foods out of my diet. I'm so excited talking about this, I'm stuttering. And then finally, all these things, in addition to being in ketosis, is going to promote the burning of body fat for fuel. And we see a great cartoon here about low carb dieting because low carb dieting is just so much fun. So, lowering blood sugar levels, all right? A carbohydrate-rich food is going to have the greatest and most acute effect on my blood sugar. So when you see in the graph right here, you see my blood sugar levels after eating different types of foods. And you see those big spikes are gonna be from eating really carbohydrate-rich foods. Not just that, but really simple carbohydrates. So remember, the simpler the carbohydrate, the closer it is to pure sugar, okay? So a complex carbohydrate is gonna have more fiber, it's gonna have a little more roughage. A simple carbohydrate, white flour, white rice, white pasta, is gonna have an incredible spike in my blood sugar levels. A baked potato, which a lot of times people thought was a really healthy side, baked potato is actually one of the most acute blood sugar spikes of any carbohydrate food that I could possibly ingest. So we're gonna see in this chart that these spikes are right after really carbohydrate rich meals and really simple carbohydrate rich meals. All right. So again, these crashes in blood sugar, we just talked about it, they're gonna cause fatigue, they're gonna cause lethargy, and they're gonna make us insanely hungry because now my glycogen stores, boom, boom, have been consumed, so my body's all of a sudden gonna be scrambling to refuel itself, and it wants to refuel itself in the simplest way possible, so it sends out those cravings for those sugars. And then finally, a low carbohydrate diet is going to remove those insulin bomb foods that create these kind of spikes that you're seeing in your chart. All right? So we're gonna get to ketosis now and why it's so important. So ketosis is a condition in which levels of ketones or ketone bodies in the blood are elevated, all right? And ketones are formed when glycogen stores in the liver have run out. So when we get rid of all of our glycogen, all of our carbohydrates in our body, everything we've stored in our muscles, everything we've stored in our liver, everything stored in our body, when we go through all of those fuel reserve, we start producing these ketones, these ketonic bodies, and they are going to start burning body fat for energy, all right? And they release ketones in the blood. So this is gonna start really promoting turning over to switching to body fat to fuel all of my kind of activity that's happening, all right? So when I eat fats and proteins for energy and I keep my blood sugar levels low, I'm gonna empty out those glycogen stores. I'm gonna consume all that glucose that my body has processed for energy, and I'm gonna start entering the state of ketosis. And ketosis is gonna be a really powerful way to eliminate body fat, and burn it as fuel, all right, which is gonna help me to lean out and lose specifically body fat, not muscle mass when I'm dieting, right? So that's ketosis and why it's so important and how low carb dieting creates that important state. So now that we've talked about losing body fat, we're talking about some other diet problems that are solved passively when you switch over to a low carbohydrate diet. So the first thing is that most high carb foods contain gluten and sugar and are really highly processed. So when we think about things like cereals, oatmeals, granola bars, bread, white bread, pasta, these are really refined, really processed foods. So when we switch over to a low carbohydrate diet, as long as we're not consuming a crazy amount of food product, protein bars, protein shakes, things like that, we're gonna be getting rid of a lot of processed foods from our diet really pretty passively, okay? The next thing is that people who are allergic to gluten or people who are gluten sensitive, People who do that and consume gluten are going to experience fatigue, gas, stomach pain. They're going to experience brain fog, which a lot of times is when you can't really focus, can't really zero in on things. They're going to experience rashes and headaches and insomnia and bloating, all from the consumption of gluten. So when I get gluten, which is a wheat-based protein, okay, so now we're actually learning what gluten is. Gluten is a wheat-based protein that most people are allergic to some degree. When we get rid of that from our diet, we're gonna start feeling a lot better. My GI, my skin, everything's gonna feel a lot better. And that happens passively when I switch over to a low carbohydrate diet. I start getting rid of some of my carbohydrate-rich foods. Now finally, the average American consumes 200 pounds of sugar a year, okay? 200 pounds of sugar a year is the average American. Now, when you do the calories on that, that's 100,000 calories, okay? That is over 100,000 calories. So think about it, if you could cut out a total of 100,000 calories over 365 days by getting rid of that sugar. And again, we're not actively looking to get rid of sugar, we're just eating low carbs, so we're starting to eliminate that sugar intake, all right? So these are ways that I'm gonna solve a lot of diet problems that I have passively without specifically trying to get rid of gluten, processed foods, sugar. Just switching over to this low carb model is gonna solve a lot of those problems for me. All right, so when we discuss problems and complications of low carb dieting, this is where a lot of people are gonna come in and start saying, well, I tried a low carb diet and I had this happen, or my doctor said I should look out for this, or I just read in this magazine that maybe low carb dieting isn't an advantageous way of consuming food. There are legitimate problems and complications, or I should say potential problems and complications from a low carb eating system. So we're gonna go through some of those right now. And the first being that low carb diets can affect performance in athletes and intense exercisers. So if you are an in-season athlete, any kind of competitor or training to do so, a low carbohydrate diet is going to rob performance a little bit. So obviously if you are training for a marathon, training for a triathlon, you are a soccer player, football player, whatever, you're gonna need some carbohydrates for fuel, and that's gonna be really important to your performance. Now, if you are an exerciser in the capacity that I'd like to think 80 to 90% of actual exercisers are, which is you're looking to increase lean muscle mass, decrease body fat, and do those types of things, or create an anabolic state, this is gonna be a great way of eating for you. But again, if your performance in your sport or activity matters to you, a low carbohydrate diet is not going to be as advantageous as one that is a medium, I would call it a medium intake carbohydrate diet. You never wanna be all carbs. No one eats spaghetti 4 meals a day, not even Chef Boyardee, so you can't either. We gotta dial that down a little bit. Now, people talk about low carb diets encouraging dehydration, which isn't necessarily true. Obviously with a low carb diet, your body's gonna lose a lot of water since carbohydrates help my body keep a lot of water. So you're gonna need to increase your fluid intake in order to make sure that you're not achieving a dehydrated state, but that's pretty easy to counteract. Now, things like kidney stones and constipation, these come a lot of times from, kidney stones are obviously something that better hydration can increase that, or increase the likelihood that that doesn't happen. And as for constipation, I like to think that that comes a lot of times from people making their low carb diet all about protein intake and not thinking about fats, fruits, and vegetables. Because fats, fruits, and vegetables are gonna increase my fiber content, so things like constipation aren't gonna create as big of an issue. So if you've relied on carbohydrate-based foods, maybe it's bran cereal or a bran muffin or something like that, if you've been relying on that as how you get all of your dietary fiber, you're gonna obviously have to switch to fruits, vegetables, and some healthy fats to get that same amount of fiber so that that doesn't become a problem. But I find that people who experience constipation on a low carb diet are, again, thinking about consuming all protein. They're so excited because they're gonna eat chicken and bacon and things like that, that they don't start to think about the other foods on their plate. So there are some legitimate problems and complications. And obviously, if you are someone who takes medication for some type of existing medical condition, you're gonna wanna discuss your diet methodology with your physician to make sure that there's not something that potentially negatively acts with the medication that you're taking. So how to transition to a low carb diet. So by now, I have now sold you on this low carb dieting thing. You are all about low carb dieting and you can't just switch right over. Maybe you can, and if you can, I suggest you do so. But if you're someone who needs to transition to that low carb system, there are easy ways to do that. So the first way to do that is to remove all of your liquid-based calories. So this is gonna be sodas, sweetened teas, juices, alcohol, things maybe you're putting in your coffee or your tea. When you remove all of your liquid-based calories, you're gonna be removing a lot of simple sugars from your diet and your intake. So think about anything that you drink that has calories in it, 9 times out of 10, it has sugar in it, right? So the easiest way to get rid of my carbs, if you're a soda drinker, if you're a juice drinker, if you're a wine drinker, if you start dialing that intake back, you're gonna really start to take a lot of the really, really simple carbohydrates out of your diet. Now next, you're gonna start removing carbs from your evening meals first. So let's say you eat 4 times a day, maybe 5 times a day, and you have carbohydrates at every meal. By start to take them out of the evening meals, your dinner meal, your afternoon snack, your lunch, and moving down the day like that, you're actually gonna be making it a little easier on yourself. I always tell people, eat for what you're about to do. So with dinner, you're about to probably go to bed. So you don't need a huge carbohydrate bomb right before you go to bed, unless you're a sleep marathoner, in which case it will be cool to meet you because you're the one that exists, or maybe you're a sleep fighter like Ron Swanson and you need to carb up a little bit to do that. I don't know, but odds are you're gonna go to sleep and you're gonna lay still for 7 to 9 hours, so you don't need this incredible carbohydrate bomb before you go to sleep. Next, start subbing in low carb foods for typical carb foods. And we're gonna talk about this too. But things like quinoa, things like using cauliflower as a rice substitute or mashing as a potato substitute. Start switching foods that you can kind of fake out what you would normally have as a carbohydrate. If you are a big pasta eater, think about starting to put in spaghetti squash instead of pasta into stuff that you're making, and start subbing that stuff in. So you can kind of really ease into low carb eating. And the more you do that, the more you're gonna find that you feel better eating those foods and then to be able to taper them off. But if you're someone who just is so used to having rice with dinner or mashed potatoes with dinner or pasta, start subbing in those foods here and there. You know, I talked about how a lot of people talk about grating cauliflower on a cheese grater and then making that like rice instead of rice. That's a cool fake me out. Now, with that being said, it's very important that you be careful of trying to make high carbohydrate foods out of low carbohydrate foods. And this is something that we've seen get really popular with like paleo eating. People talk about making a paleo pizza or a paleo birthday cake or a paleo whatever, you know what I mean? Once you start taking low carbohydrate foods and trying to make them into high carbohydrate foods, we are really adding a lot of things. We're adding a lot of calories, we're adding a lot of other kind of foods or additives or things to fake that stuff out. So really be wary of trying to recreate high carbohydrate foods with low carbohydrate foods, because a lot of times, just calorie wise, you end up making something that's a huge bomb. And then so finally, how to transition to a low carb diet, and this is the toughest one, you have to ride out the lows in your diet. When you are feeling totally flat, when you are feeling totally zapped of energy, when you are feeling like totally groggy and you just want to have a bunch of pretzels or, you know, a big bowl of spaghetti, you've got to ride that period out. You know, going to a low carbohydrate diet, is a lot of times like quitting smoking. You know, you got to get over like that 7 to 10 day hump. And then once you get there, your body will have stabilized. So initially, you're gonna have this huge spike and this huge dip with your blood sugar because you're not getting any carbohydrates to refuel those glycogen stores. So your body's really gonna be kicking you in the butt saying like, yo, give me some carbohydrates. I need it to get my blood sugar way back up. But you don't want it way back up. You want it to stabilize right in here. And after a couple days on a low carbohydrate diet, your body's gonna do that, I promise you. You just have to ride out those lows. So for the people that said, oh, I did a high carbohydrate diet, it didn't work, I just got so ravenously hungry and I caved. Well, that's right, you caved. You know what I mean? If you can fight off that urge to cave and really just pound carbohydrates into your face, you're gonna end up on the other side of it in a state where you're a lot more stable energy-wise with your new low carb eating thing. So that's how you transition to that low carb diet. So how to make your low carb life work. So how do we switch it now from a low carb diet to a low carb lifestyle? How do we carry that over from making something I'm doing for 2 weeks before I go to the beach into something I'm doing year round? Well, there are a lot of really simple tips and tricks you can do to make this work. So one is include lots of vegetables. And this is something that even I still struggle with. A lot of times if I feel like I'm not waking up lean anymore, you know, every day I want to wake up as lean or leaner as the day before. And when there are days that I find that I'm not doing that, a lot of times it's not eating enough vegetables. Vegetables are gonna give me a lot of vitamins, a lot of minerals, a lot of fiber, and they're gonna really help me feel full and feel satiated. So when I'm backing off my veggies, I can see that in my body when I look in the mirror, and I can feel that too. So including a lot of vegetables in your diet is gonna be a huge way to help you feel full. Next is you're going to eat healthy fats, okay? So again, when people switch to a low carbohydrate diet, they start thinking about, instead of having it be low carb, they have it be high protein. So high protein means that's just all you're eating, but low carb means like, okay, well I can also have a lot of vegetables, I can also have a lot of healthy fats, I can also have some fruits, and I can also eat protein. So we gotta think about all those other things that exist outside of protein. So I gotta eat my healthy fats. What's healthy fat? That's anything that grows from the ground fatty. So we're talking about nuts, seeds, avocados, olives, things like that. So anything that grows from the ground fatty is a fat that I really want in my diet. And the more I have of those, again, I'm gonna be getting some protein from that, I'm getting some fiber from that, I'm gonna be getting a lot of good stuff, and it's gonna help me feel really full. Now, increasing your fats like that is also gonna help your skin, your nails, your hair, all that stuff. So there's gonna be a lot of fringe benefits from doing that. Drink a lot of water, okay? Drinking a lot of water is so important. It's another thing that gets forgotten about. You know, have a water bottle with you, make sure it's full. I'm not gonna tell you to drink 2 gallons of water a day, but just make sure you're drinking water. And again, monitoring the color of your urine is a great way to do that. Too dark, you're dehydrated. Clear, you could back off a little bit. Keep bars and shakes to 2 meals a day or snacks meals a day at most. One thing that I see a lot in my clients and people that I work with who switch to a low carbohydrate diet is they start including a lot of product instead of real food. So these are protein bars, protein shakes, Atkins products, other low carb products. But the thing is, these aren't really food as much as they are food-like substances. We are taking things that at one point are food and we're processing them into a bar or a shake. That's a lot of steps between you and the vine or you and the animal. So try to limit those things. Now, of course, I'm a busy guy, you're a busy person, we're all over the place. If you wanna have a protein bar every now and again or a protein shake every now and again, or that's something that's easy for you to get one time a day, I suggest you do that, but don't have it be 4 protein shakes a day and then a dinner. Keep it to real food. Real food's fantastic. Let's eat more of it. Now, people talk about being lethargic in the afternoons on a low carb diet. And my answer is drink coffee. Coffee is amazing. People always come to me and say, hey, I'm cutting out coffee. I'm like, that's so stupid. Coffee's fantastic. You should drink a ton of it all the time, which isn't really true. But I tell a lot of people, if you have a cup of coffee in the mid to late afternoon, if you are an evening gym goer, let's say maybe 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you have a cup of coffee, that 5 o'clock workout isn't gonna feel so painful. And there are actually a lot of studies that suggest that caffeine intake before your workout is gonna increase not just the effectiveness and the efficacy of your fat burning workout, but it's also gonna help you to recover more quickly on the other side of it. So obviously, that's something you wanna play with. If you find that a cup of coffee in the afternoon is gonna kill how you sleep that night, maybe have it be a cup of green tea, that's another great thing. But pump up a cup of coffee every now and again when you feel low. You're gonna have days initially where it's gonna be your saving grace. I love coffee, you love coffee. Let's have more coffee, huh? Coffee's fantastic. And then plan meals in advance, don't simply wing it. When I have my best weeks in a low carb diet, it is because my wife and I have sat down and we have looked at our entire week of eating. What do we want to have in the house? What do we want to have prepared? What do we want to go to the store and get? And we plan it all out. If I know that I'm going to be traveling or I'm going to be on the road a lot that day, I'll either pack what I need or I'll find places around me to go eat where I know I'm gonna be able to eat in this capacity. But when you leave yourself to wing it, when you go out during the day and you're like, man, I wanna eat this way, but I'm just gonna go out and hope for the best, a lot of times you're not gonna find the stuff that you need or the stuff that is the best possible food for you to be consuming to stay on your low carb diet. So if you're gonna be traveling and you can't travel with food, if you're staying at a hotel, one thing I like to do is look around on Google, find out what places by your hotel have food that you can eat. What places by your hotel can you go buy stuff? Is there a grocery store? Is there a deli? Is there a mini mart? Start finding out what's there so that you can start to plan where you're gonna get food and what you're gonna get. That's gonna help really make your low carb lifestyle successful. And then in the end, if you find that even with the roughage that you're getting from fruits, vegetables, nuts, even if that's not working for you, you might want to consider a fiber supplement. That's just something that you're going to have to gauge yourself, but that's something that can always be really helpful. So the exceptions for living low carb, the times that I want to have carbohydrates in my diet, and a lot of times want to have some simple carbohydrates, there are times during the day where I want that, but there are ways to do it so it doesn't shoot your whole low carb plan. So the best time for me to have a lot of simple carbs are right after a really hard workout, specifically a resistance training workout or an anaerobic workout. Because what I'm gonna do in that workout is I'm gonna kill all of my glycogen stores, but I need a little bit of carbohydrate in my system to transport those amino acids, what my body breaks proteins down into, to my muscles to rebuild them. So I need a transport for that, and that's what my blood sugar is gonna do. So by increasing your blood sugar after your workout, so this could be having a Gatorade with your post-workout shake or having a banana or something like that, you're gonna be increasing your body's ability to recover after a workout without shooting all of your low carb diet progress in the foot. Before a hard workout is another time to do that. If you feel like on your way to the gym when you're eating low carb, you just do not have the energy to do anything, consider bumping up your carbohydrate intake before that happens. All right. First thing in the morning, if you absolutely need some carbs in your day, this is the best time to have them, is first thing in the morning. So whether you want to have oatmeal with breakfast or something like that, if I have my carbohydrates early in the day, odds are I'm going to burn them off by the end of the day. But if I have them with dinner, if I have them for dessert, I'm doing that right before I go to bed. So a lot of times those are going to be processed and stored as body fat as opposed to being given the opportunity to be used for fuel throughout the day. So another time to do this is after a long time on a low carb diet. When you feel like on your low carb diet that you are not getting leaner, you're not losing weight, you're feeling weaker, you're feeling really zapped, a lot of times a little stint of pumping up your carbohydrate intake is gonna help your body to start being a good low carb dieter again, you know what I mean? But there are times where you just have to give yourself a little bit of a break. This doesn't mean start eating like crap. That just means put some carbohydrates back into your diet, back into your day-to-day for a little bit, and then taper them off again. And then, obviously, if you have a medicine or a medical condition that requires you to increase your carbohydrate intake, I've heard about these. They're not insanely common, but if that's the case, you gotta do what you gotta do. Your health is the most important thing over your looks. Billy Crystal would disagree, but your health is most important, not how you look. Increase those carbohydrates to take your medication and get over whatever medical condition you may need and look to get back on your low carb diet when you're over that. So people ask some smart carbs for carb loading after that stint. So fruit is gonna be a great carbohydrate after a long low carb stint. Rice is gonna be another good one. Rice does not contain gluten, so it's gonna be a really good carb for you to get back into your system to help your body blow up. Sweet potatoes are another one that are really, really great. There's not a bodybuilder on the planet who does not eat sweet potatoes, even when they're leaning out, so they're a good carb for loading and recovery. Gluten-free oatmeal is another great example. Bob's Red Mill makes a gluten-free oatmeal. And then juices and coconut waters. One thing I like to do is right after my workout, I like to mix 1 or 2 scoops of whey protein in either a coconut water or an orange juice. Does it taste awesome? Sometimes. Is it really, really good for my recovery? Absolutely. It's a great way for me to get some real simple sugars into my body to help my body repair my muscle tissue, get back on track, and then I'm right back on my low carb diet. So some easy low carb swaps for you. First, swap almond meal or coconut flour in baking whenever you use flour, okay? So if you have a recipe, maybe something needs to be dredged in flour, you need to add flour to it to thicken it up. It's a soup, it's a gravy, it's a casserole, whatever. Almond meal and coconut flour are 2 great options at how to get flour out of recipes and out of baking and to reduce the overall carbohydrate content. Spaghetti squash, like I talked about earlier, can sub in for pasta and noodles. And the other thing about a great thing about a spaghetti squash is you can buy it, you can put it on top of your fridge, I think for like 8 years, and it's still good. It's a really great thing like that. Cauliflower can be used similar to rice. We talked about that earlier. You can grate it on a cheese grater, get little pieces. You can make it like rice. You can steam it and mash it like potatoes. It's just a really versatile thing like that. And then anytime you're having something with cheese or hummus or dip or anything like that, rather than going to crackers or chips, think about cucumbers, peppers, and celery, and that's the way that you can start putting in some low carbohydrate and even, dare I say, some healthy foods into some other time you would be eating hors d'oeuvres or otherwise kind of absent-mindedly eating. So those are some easy swaps. And then finally, some things to consider. Remember, you're gonna experience an initial energy dip on a low carb diet. You're gonna have this period where your blood sugar is gonna bottom out, you're gonna scrape the bump as you're going over it, so to speak, and you just gotta power through that. Next, you gotta rethink your food paradigms. A lot of times we get caught in this thinking that certain foods are for breakfast, certain foods are for lunch, certain foods are for later in the day. Get over that. Food is food. If you wanna have a salad for breakfast, have a salad for breakfast. You know what I mean? Get over those kind of paradigms, all right? Calorie content is still a thing to consider. It doesn't have to be the guiding principle of your nutrition, but it is something you have to remember. If you're eating low carb and you're consuming 8,000 calories a day, that's probably not gonna gain strength and lose body fat. You can't eat all ribs and wings and just say I'm not having any carbs. It doesn't really work that way. Be practical and don't create foods like we talked about. Don't buy into that stuff about making a low carb burger, making a low carb pizza, making a low carb birthday cake. It's still pizza, it's still birthday cake. You gotta still consider that you can't create foods out of low carb foods. And then cheat days can still be low carb. I talked about ribs and wings. Those are two of my favorite things to have as a cheat meal that don't completely shoot my low carb paradigm. I don't wanna go out and buy a family sized bag of Ruffles or one of those big tubs of Snyder sourdough pretzels. I'll have ribs, I'll have wings, I'll have some other fatty protein that's gonna give me a sense of kind of cheat satiety, but it's not gonna be a whole ton of carbohydrates that I have to go through the whole through getting over my low carb dip again. And then finally, like anything else, this is your low carb diet, this is your lifestyle, give it time. Don't look up after a week, 2 weeks and decide to bail. Give it 4 weeks, really see if it's something for you. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I guarantee by giving this time, you're really gonna see results. So this is what we have for low carb dieting. Hopefully this is something that you can implement and that you can learn to help make low carb dieting more of a lifestyle, more of a day in, day out, long-term thing for you to help making sure that you're increasing and maintaining your lean mass, decreasing your body fat levels, and increasing your overall health level. So that's this presentation. I hope it's been good for you. I hope it's been informative. Thanks for tuning in.